Hey UX community. As I've been doing this design system series of tutorials, I've been struggling about when to introduce the subject matter we're going to cover off on today, which is icons. It's a really important subject matter and a really important topic, especially if you're designing a design system. There's lots of ways to go about this, and technically I guess maybe we should have talked about this back when we created the buttons, or maybe before we created the buttons, so that we would have had some icons to use for said buttons. Now, that being said, we did not do that, so let's jump in and talk about that now. Let's go ahead and take, if you guys have been following along and you've got a file that looks like this, let's go ahead and let's just move our buttons over a tad here. Let's just go ahead and duplicate our fonts page, just because we've got all of our sort of, if you guys have been following along, again, then you'll know that we'll have all of our sort of auto layout componentry that we need built into one of these existing pages that we have. So, I'm a bit of a neat freak, so I always like to kind of make sure all my stuff has equal spacing between it, but, feel free to do as you want. And let's take that font page that we just duplicated, and let's change that to, sorry, we were talking about icons today. Let's change that to icons and just go ahead and delete the stuff that's in here. So before we jump in and start creating icons, let's talk a little bit about sizing, for example. So when you want to create an icon set, you're going to want to think about probably sort of what your primary needs are going to be. I think I typically like to create my icon sets with two primary sizes. I like to create a micro size, which if we create a frame here, let's go ahead and just dump a frame on the page here. Let's go ahead and dump another frame on. I like to create two primary sizes for my icons. I like to create what I refer to as micro, and I like to create what I refer to as small, which is probably my more common size. So the point of micro is that we want to create this micro. Let's go over here and go to our width and height. Let's set micro to 16 by 16. We can go ahead and we can kill the fill color on this. We're just going to design an icon in there, so we don't necessarily need a fill on it. I mean, unless you want a background fill for your icons. I don't like to do mine that way. I don't do mine, sort of app style, but if you're designing an app, maybe you want a background fill on here, maybe you want to round these corners, so you can come over here to corner rounding, and on that frame you could set up your corner rounding to like 10 or 20 or whatever it is. I like to do mine at like 24 or 16 or something that adheres to my 8-pix grid. I try to adhere to my 8-pix grid for everything, so that's just me. But again, I'm going to take the corner rounding off this because we're not going to do a fill on these. But if you were doing like a mobile app or something and you needed that rounded edge, like that rounded corner box or whatever, you could do that. So on the small size, I think at the company that I'm working at now, I think my current sizes are my micro, which is 16 by 16, and my small, which I think is 24 by 24. And then I believe we just allow the 24 by 24 to scale up to any larger needs. We're doing a pretty robust application. Our icons are typically pretty small. If you were doing like a mobile app or something like that, you might need several other sizes. You might need like a 32 by 32 and a 64 by 64 and all those sort of common icon sizes that you need to support like the App Store and that kind of thing. I think the App Store goes up by multiplications of 2 all the way up to like 128 or something like that, I think. I don't really recall. It's been a minute since I've looked at that stuff. But again, we just need a small, whatever your sort of next size up is going to be, whatever your largest size is, and you probably want a micro, which like I said before is 16 by 16. And the reason for that is that oftentimes when you get into this really tiny size, and again, if you're doing a mobile app, you probably don't need a 16 by 16. You can probably avoid this. But if you're doing a really robust application that supports all different kinds of breakpoints, like from everything from mobile all the way up to any number of desktop sizes and stuff, you may find that you need this little micro size from time to time for, if you've got a really data dense application that you're designing, you can find yourself needing like these little 16 by 16s. I find that I use them in buttons, for example. Like I often use that really tiny size for buttons, because in a button you're not going to do a really high detail icon. You're probably going to do some pretty low detail icon, and it's okay to make them small like this. But the reason I do the two different sizes is because the micro size, oftentimes, depending on how detailed your icon set is, if you want to make sure that you're doing everything that you design in both of these sizes, oftentimes the micro size might have a little less detail in it. You might want to kill some of the details so that it's a little more legible at that small of a size at 100%. So I like to do my micro design and then my small design, and then just scale my small design up to all the other sizes, any other sizing needs that I have. So that is just something that I found works for me. Now let's get into a whole other subject. Do you need to design your entire icon set? That is probably a question only you can answer. I like to personally, anytime I'm designing an application, if it's a really robust application, I like to design my own icons. And the reason I do that is because, there are often things that you get into, often subject matters that you get into, or needs that you have for that application that aren't met by some standard icon set. Now that being said, if you guys happen to be designing if you're designing this design system for like a website or a pretty minimal application that's not super robust, it's not data rich or content dense or whatever, and you don't have a lot of really sort of customized needs, for your icon set, there is an argument for potentially, let's switch over here to Chrome. There is potentially an argument for just using, some kind of an open source icon library. I'm not telling you that you need to design your icons every time. That's up to you to decide. There's some really nice icon libraries out there. Font Awesome, I think, is pay now. It used to be free. I think you have to pay now, or you can get some for free and some you have to pay now. This used to be totally free. It's currently not completely free anymore. But again, if you have simple icon needs, if we jump into the icons here on Font Awesome, you can see like it's really great. Font Awesome's pretty cool. Why knock yourself out designing a custom set of icons if you don't need to? If you like one of these styles that they've created or whatever, and you feel okay about using an icon library or whatever, if this meets all your needs and you're good with that, feel free. I'm not saying you have to design an icon set by any means. So here's another sort of open source icon library that I've discovered recently that I think is pretty cool, this Icon Noir. If you jump into the icons here and we jump down here, this is pretty cool. Like, I really love their icon designs. I think they're pretty cool, and the ability to change the sizing right here on the fly. You can go in here and set the color if you want some other color. I tend to stay pretty neutral with my icons. I tend to not really use a lot of color in my icon sets, but that's because, again, I'm doing a very data-rich application that, that I'm trying very hard to control the visual noise in the applications that I'm working on. And, if the icons get too loud or too obnoxious, it can make our application, sort of visually noisy, which I'm trying to avoid. So, but again, what's really cool about this set is you can change the stroke width. I haven't seen any other sets where you can do that, where you can actually control the stroke width yourself. You can, change the color. You can download these, whatever you need to do with these guys. You can download the SVG, copy the SVG. This is a pretty cool feature that I hadn't seen on any of the other open source libraries that I've seen. If you happen to be working with developers that are using Bootstrap, Bootstrap now has its own icon library. So, your developers would probably love you if you could get by with the Bootstrap library if they happen to be using Bootstrap. And then if we want to start getting into talking about how you create icon fonts for your dev team, there are like, I ran across a few things in Figma the other day. So we've got this icon font generator, which is pretty interesting. There's some plugins in Figma. Now, I haven't really explored these plugins. Me and my dev team, I work very closely with my dev team, and I actually pop open a terminal and I download the source from GitLab, and I upload new icons when I need to upload new icons, and I do a merge request, and we have a whole pipeline that does an automated process where it automatically generates the the font mapping for us, because we have over 500 icons right now. So I did not want to have to manually try to keep track of this sort of font mapping for 500 plus icons. So I worked closely with our dev team to figure out an automated process that would automatically map our icons, and it's part of our build process. So once I do like I said, once I do a merge request with dev, they double check my work, and then it goes through a pipeline that maps those for us. So I say either do whatever works for you. If you only need a few icons and you want to map them yourself, you could try out one of these things. I haven't really tried them. There's plenty of freeware online font creation tools or whatever where you can upload SVGs and create your own font with whatever mapping you want for your icons. So there's lots of options out there. Do whatever works for you. But I will say this. The reason I like creating a custom icon set for a lot of the applications I work on is because it gives whatever company I'm working for, it gives them complete and total ownership of that. And so not only does it give me the opportunity to create any custom icons that I might need, because I find that frequently you might jump in there, you might try to use one of those open source icon sets, and you get halfway through the project and all of a sudden you're finding that, oh shit, there's this need that, that this app that I'm working on has that's not really covered by this open source library. So now you got to create a custom icon. You got to try to make it look like that open source library. And then how do you get it into your development team and have them be able to access it when they're using that library, instead of having figured out your own method for using your own library? Then you've got this mix of custom icons and open source library that you're using, and you got constantly trying to balance that. Which thing are we using? Are we using a custom one, or are we using one from the library? What's the mapping for that, etc.? So for me, I just like to make my own custom set. So let's jump in and let's do that real quick. And let's make a couple of custom icons, like just some common ones real quick, just to get us started. I often will, for example, here we just, when we built this button back, if you guys were following along for that, I just made this simple circle just to give us something to throw in here. But let's go ahead and make, a few more sort of more real icons, stuff that would be used in a real world scenario. I mean, one of the things you're always going to need is you're always going to need an arrow, right? Like, no matter what, there's always going to be a need for arrows. So let's go ahead and make a few arrows as some icons here. So you might want to say, let's say we're going to name this maybe small. We can use slash naming too. So let's use slash naming here to organize these icons, so that, and I'll explain a little bit more about that as we go. But let's say small icons. Arrow right, just for a starting place for us. So, and then let's do the same thing over here. So we'll say micro slash icons. And you could really go either way. Your naming convention can be whatever you want it to be. I like to separate them out by size. I guess we could do it this way too. We could say icons small, and then that will put them in the same icons folder, rather than separating them out by size and then putting the icons after the fact. That will create two separate folders. It'll create a micro folder and a small folder, whereas if we do it this way, if we say icons, micro, icons, small, then those will get grouped together underneath unique size options. So let's do arrow right. So if we go in here, click in, and then, you know, let's go ahead and do this. Let's say we're going to do some kind of maybe a stroke style or whatever. So if I was going to do an arrow, I'd probably start with a box, you know, with like a plain cube or whatever. Let's rotate that 45 degrees. And now how do you break this? So for those of you who don't know, if for anyone that's been working in Figma for a while, you're probably already familiar with this. But if you have not been working in Figma, the first time I got into Figma, I was like, how in the hell do you break a closed path in Figma? I had no idea how to do it. And it seemed like everything that I tried was creating an additional closed path. So if you double click into a shape, so we're out here at the parent level or at the root level here. If you double click into this shape you just made, you'll see now that you have points and you have you know, paths here. So you've got these individual points, and then you've got your individual line segments in between those points. If you come up here and you start looking at your tools, you're going to see you have no eraser tool. You have no cut tool. You have no tool like that that would resemble anything that you might be used to seeing in like Illustrator or another vector editing program. You're not going to get any of that stuff in Figma. And what used to happen is I would come in here and I would try to delete one of these points to see what that would do. And what would happen is I would get this. And I would be like, what the shit, Figma? Like, what? How am I... You know, that's not the arrow shape I want. How do I get rid of this? Like, how do I solve this problem? Well, it's a little bit easier now because Figma recently updated their stuff. So all you have to do is double click into this, get into the shape itself like we're in here, select a point, and then just simply hit the delete key on your keyboard. And that will create an open path. Now let's undo that. Let's say for whatever reason, let's say we did want this a closed path arrow here. So all you have to do is hold shift and delete, and that will keep your closed path. Figma recently reversed those, which has made it much more usable. It used to be that delete would create the closed path, and then you had to do the shift or something, or you had to hit like control or something. You had to hit some other key to open that path up. But Figma recently changed that, thank goodness. So lots of folks probably aren't getting as stuck as I was stuck in the beginning when Figma had it really, like, the usability was horrible. It was really janky. So now when you hit delete, it kind of does what you expect. It actually just deletes that point and opens the path. So let's see, because I think I may have been hitting backspace in the beginning. Yeah, backspace does open the path now too. So either one of those, if you're hitting backspace or delete, whichever, both of those seem to work now. So let's just go ahead and hit delete, because what I wanted was an open path. So again, shift delete for a closed path, regular delete for an open path. And then I probably wouldn't create an arrow that was this sort of carrot-like, right? Like I would probably want to shallow that up a little bit. And then if you come over here to your line settings, you know, come over here to our line settings, and then, you know, you can change your, you know, you can change the line thickness here. Obviously, you can change that to whatever you want. I mean, for me, I think I'm just going to go with 2 here. We can always change this later too, as long as we don't outline this. But if you click on this little ellipsis over here in this menu, you can choose your inside outside center alignment here, which obviously we're going to be stuck with, you know, center regardless of what you select. You're going to be stuck with center in this scenario because we've you know, we've got an open path here. So if you select the ellipsis and open that up, you've got sort of some of the other settings you would expect to see in like Illustrator or whatever, where you can, you know, you can round your join, or, you know, angle your join, or square off your join, or whatever. You can do all those different things here. And then also, if we get in here, let's say that So let's get out here, and once we've escaped out, so once you click outside of that, double click outside of it or hit escape, and you'll escape out of that, and you'll see something else that's kind of weird is you get this kind of bounding box that still sees us as being inside of our square. If that doesn't bother you, you can certainly leave this as is. But, you know, for whatever reason, that just annoys me. I'm just a bit of a neat freak, and I want to see my line. I don't want to see all that nonsense. And so for me, it took me a while to figure this out too, but Figma's got this notion of flatten. So if you flatten that out, it basically removes that exterior bounding box. So now we're down to the sort of, the child level, like where we're down to the base bounding box of that particular shape. So once you've flattened it, you can still make additional edits. Like if we come over here and take a look over here in our line, so just be aware of that too. Like let's say we want to change our end caps. Let's say we want to make those round. You can make our end caps round. You can set one to round and one to square if you want. I mean, we wouldn't want to do that for an arrow, but you can separate the end cap, which I think is kind of interesting. I don't know if you can actually do that in Illustrator without creating two separate segments or whatever. I don't like that. Was kind of an interesting feature that is I don't know. I haven't really found a use for it yet, but you can add arrows to the end of lines or whatever if you need to do that and that kind of stuff. But you do all that here. Just remember that if you're inside of the shape, now that we've selected those things are available to us here. Maybe they were available before and I just wasn't seeing them, but I didn't remember those being available at this level before until I selected it at the exterior level. So if you're in here doing this initially and you don't see that feature, then just double click out of it and it'll be down here. I didn't see it when we were in there earlier, so I think that has only appeared because I've changed the default end cap. So once we have that created, we've kind of got our arrow. Now I wasn't super careful about aligning to the grid here because I'm just doing a tutorial. This isn't going to be a real design system for me. So, obviously pay attention to where you're aligned. If, for example, you might want to pull this down to where you're aligned to your grid, you can see it snaps to the grid automatically. So, pay attention to your gaps here. Like if I was doing an 8-pixel grid here, I'd probably want to make sure that, that I was doing some kind of a 4-point half step or for padding or something like that. If I was going to put padding, I don't know. I'd get real strict with myself about how I'm creating these and how they align to whatever my 8-pixel grid, if that's what I'm using, and that kind of thing. So something just to be aware of is you can snap to pixels real easily in Figma. Figma kind of defaults to pixel perfect stuff. So even if we go in here and we select this element and we center align it, it's unless you tell it to stop snapping to the pixel, it will make whatever adjustments it needs to automatically snap to pixel. All of your snapping is up here somewhere. Again, I don't create a lot of icons in Figma. I prefer to create mine in Illustrator, and I just sort of export them out and then copy them into Figma just because I like all of the extra control that I have over the vector editing tools. But if you get into, you can dig into here and say, like view or edit or wherever it's at. Let's see if we can find it where the snap settings are. I mean, I typically leave it to snap. So maybe it's in object. I can't remember, and I don't like to use too many shortcuts with. I like to make sure I show you guys where something lives in the menu. Anyway, we can snap to pixel grid. Here it is. All right, so don't forget about that too. I sometimes forget how good Figma's search is. So I wanted to find the snap to reference, and when I roll over it, it shows me right where it is. It opens the menu. So don't forget that you've got help here. Figma has recently added a lot of cool search functionality into their stuff, which is pretty awesome. So it's underneath the Figma preferences menu, which again, I wouldn't have expected. I was expecting it to be in view or object or something associated with what we were doing here. I did not expect that to be under the preference menu. So there's where you change all your snapping. And then if we're in here, okay, we've got our 24 by 24 created, and then, you know, I don't know, maybe it's easier just to go ahead and say, okay, let's take this icon that we just created, let's go ahead and paste it in here. Obviously, we're going to have some fitment issues, but we can just go ahead and then sort of size that down to whatever we think we want that size to be. And then we can just go over here and just center that up. That's interesting. Let's try that again. I don't know why that centered in a weird way like that. Figma can be a little buggy, so be prepared for that. I've been finding it to be a little bit buggy here and there. And again, you could sort of, you know, draw this out and just make sure that it's snapped to, you know, to your pixel grid, or, you know, whatever, make adjustments there as needed. And, you know, I don't know, at the 16 by 16 size, you know, maybe you want this to be 1 point or something at that size. I don't know, whatever. Like I like to leave my micros a little bit thicker. I like to keep them a little thicker. I usually do them like 1.5 or something. You know, I just feel like 1 pixel is a bit thin at this small of a size. I feel like it becomes a little kind of muddy and like not as crisp, whereas if you make it a little thicker. So I never go below 1.5 on a stroke at this size unless it's a detail that I just don't care that much about. I don't care if it gets a little muddy or a little murky. Then I'll allow myself to go below that if I'm doing some sort of variable line weight type of thing or something like that, you know. But in this case, I say I'm just going to stick to 2 here, and then, you know, and then I'll make adjustments later. If we feel like this one feels too thin in comparison or something, we can make an adjustment later. But for the time being, let's just go ahead and take these. And I often, like, what we would probably do in a real scenario, I've talked to you guys about this before, is we would probably separate each one of these elements out into its own page. I'm going to go ahead and leave these here for right now, just for the time being, and then we'll make that adjustment here pretty soon. We're not going to go too much farther before we start to make that adjustment, I think, but we would want to probably separate these things out into their own page and start to organize by page. Actually, let's just go ahead and potentially go ahead and start that now. Let's say we've got a grid page, a fonts page. Actually, we may want to call this grids, because at some point you'd probably have more than one grid once you start factoring in breakpoints and start figuring out what all your different breakpoints are going to be. If you need to do something responsive, you get into more than one grid layout for sure. And we won't move everything yet. For the time being, we'll just stay here in this single page, and we'll just create a few icons real quick. And then, just like with anything else, so once we've got these created, we're probably going to want to duplicate these and do the other arrow types. I like to keep all of my, you know, and I don't know if we want to do this. You can do this wherever, top, bottom, whatever. I like to keep all my components close to the page. That's why it makes sense to break these out individually like this for the team. Like I said, we're kind of making the assumption that we want some type of a public-facing, you know, some type of a public-facing prototype or something from this. Is the only reason we're keeping all this in one page from right now. So I'll explain that a little more later as well. But let's just go ahead and say that we want to create probably, you know, if you were going to create a set of arrows, you would probably want to create all the other directions out of those arrows too, right? So we would just go ahead and let's create all four directions. I mean, you could technically just take these and rotate them, but it's sort of easier on the team if you just go ahead and you know, make all of the different directions out of these. So you know, we could go ahead and say, okay, this one, you know, first one was right. This one's going to be left. You know, you might have an up and a down. All right, and now we haven't made components out of these yet. I just kind of wanted to make some adjustments to them really quick and, you know, real quickly do this duplication. Let's say we're doing this at left. We're doing this at left, and we could, you know, technically we could sort of use our rename trick here too. You could say, you know, Command R here, and you could say, okay, we want to match right, and we want to change that to up, rename, and then here we want to rename again. We want to match right again because we just duplicated that stuff, and we want to call this one down. So now that we've got all those and we've got all their name, you know, got them all named appropriately. Now, I don't do all of my icons. Like I said, we've got over 500, and I do not do them all as variants of a, you know, you could, if your icon set was very small and you knew it wasn't ever going to get very large, and you wanted to create something that was kind of relatively easy for your team to switch in and out really quickly and easily, you could create these as variants of a component. I don't like to do that with icons because, you know, I don't know how large the icon set's going to grow, and that starts to get very hard to manage as variants. It starts to get very hard for the team to use as variants. This slash naming that we did is going to set the team up in such a way that if they need to use this component library, they will be able to swap these out relatively easily. So let's go ahead and make these components. And so you would want to say object create component, or shift command K. So let's just go ahead and do that for each one. Select each one, go ahead and make it a component. Oh geez, did not like that. All right, so option command K, option command K. Let's just do that all the way through. So I like to keep all of my components like close by the page where I'm going to display those components, but I don't necessarily, like, I like to be able to sort of access these things easily and to be able to make edits as necessary. So I keep all of my parent components near the page, the display page, but then I would actually duplicate these and just get an instance of these components for display on the page itself. So then you could figure out how you wanted to display each of these. Like, you know, let's say we wanted to, let's do a shift. Let's do a shift select and get all of the micro ones. So let's hit Shift A, which turns that into an auto layout. So now we have its own auto layout there. Let's do a shift select, Shift A to change those to an auto layout. So now we've got, you know, we've got two separate auto layouts here. Let's go over here to the spacing, and let's say we wanted to make sure we made these are our 16 by ones. Let's go ahead and change the spacing here to, you know, I don't know, whatever, let's call it 32, I guess, or something. Let's go ahead and go in here and change the spacing again to 32 on these. Then let's go ahead and select both of these auto layouts, and let's hit Shift A again to change that into an auto layout, and let's change that one to horizontal. And then if we go over here to our layers menu, you can see that we've got an auto layout container here with two other auto layouts for the icons. And then, you know, there's lots of different ways to do this. You can certainly lay yours out however you want to lay them out, but I'm just sort of giving us a starting place, something to work from. I typically sort of display my default size first, and then my secondary size second. And then because we've got the icons page in an auto layout, and we've got that size already set and everything, what we can do is we can go in here and we can say, okay, we want this to be, actually we might even want to just change each of these to rows, so we'll change that direction momentarily. But let's change the parent frame or the wrapper that these things are in, and let's change that from hug to fill container. And then let's go in and let's select the 2 frames inside of that, and let's change those from hug to fill container. And now what that's going to do is that's going to separate this layout for us and give us something that is utilizing half of the page. So we've got the micros using half of the page and the default size using half of the page. And again, we could change the layout here, and we could say, okay, we want each one of these to sit in rows until those rows get filled up, and then those could we could set those up where those wrap, so that we could start to create a side by side, where we've got all of our icons set up in this kind of side by side manner here. So we could also duplicate those. Well, actually here, what I wanted to do is duplicate this. So we could actually duplicate this, and then we could go in here and we could go ahead and get rid of those. Get rid of those, and then let's go in here and let's select our text tool. And just for the sake of just making this easy, rather than what I'll do is rather than creating the text from scratch, I'm just going to go copy one of these. So let's say we wanted our H1 there. What were we using on our other pages for? So we don't have page titles in here yet. We just have our little descriptors in. So whatever we used here for our descriptors, let's just go ahead and copy that for the time being. And then let's get in here into this frame. Let's put our descriptor in there. Again, let's put our descriptor in there, and those should resize appropriately. So we could say, default icons. Or maybe we want to just stick to our naming convention so we don't confuse people. So small icons, size 24 by, micro icons, size 16 by. And then you can see that we're starting to create sort of a display, right? We would start to, as we create, we can just keep adding to these rows and then just building out our icon set. And then, if we start to find that starts to, that we start to get a lot of icons, then you might want to create subgroups in here or whatever. You might want to start to organize these things by, like, you might have a arrows subcategory and a financial subcategory that's got stuff that's financial related, maybe a development category that's got things related to to code or math or whatever the case may be. You can figure out for yourself what you want your categories to be. But anyway, this is just kind of a rough start, so I just kind of wanted to start to introduce you guys to the notion of building your own icon set. And again, you're going to find out that you may want to do that. Again, it just depends on the complexity of your particular application, whatever you're doing this design system for. If you're doing this for a suite of applications and you don't know exactly what your icon needs are going to be, I recommend doing your own set of icons. And we'll get in and we'll start to create icons that we need. Like we'll create some different icons as we go. Like when we find out things that we need, like for the button, we might want like a download icon, or like I said, this arrow icons are quite common, right? And we might need a download icon. We might want a plus icon and a minus icon. Those are all sort of simple things that we can kind of create as we go, as we find a need for them. And, I just wanted to start to introduce you guys to this notion of icons and creating an icon set and having an icon set to move forward with. Again, I probably, for the sake of this, for the sake of these tutorials, I probably don't really even need this 16 by size. I mean, we used a 24 by size over here, and it seems to fit quite well because, I'm not getting real strict on myself. We don't have a real data dense application here that's going to require like really condensed buttons or anything like that. So it just really depends on your specific scenario. But now we've got, sort of a good baseline for us to start getting into more advanced subjects. We've got our grid, colors, fonts, icons. Buttons was a little bit of a introduction to components, and we'll start to get into more advanced components next. Again, I think I'm going to shut this one down here because I am trying to keep these relatively bite-sized. I don't want them to start to get too long. So we'll shut that down, and then we'll just know that we're going to continue to grow this icon set as we sort of continue down this path with this series of videos. I will make sure that I include those links to those open source fonts or open source icon libraries that we discussed. So if we were to jump back into Chrome here, I'll include links to all this stuff in the description if you guys are interested in any of these or want to look into any of this stuff further. Like I said, Font Awesome's always been pretty great. They've got a bunch of different versions of their icons now. Like if you dig around in here, and they've got new and V6. If you get into here, like they've got like a bunch of different styles. They've got solids and sharps, and then they've got some that are like duotone now. They've got all kinds of icons in here. I mean, here's like an example of the duotone ones that they've added recently. Well, I don't know how recently, just since the last time I looked, they've added those. Maybe it wasn't so recent ago. But anyway, I'll include links to all this stuff in the description if you guys want to go through any of these or take a look at any of this stuff. Again, I haven't really used a lot of these things from, personally, so I haven't used a lot of these add-ons, these Figma add-ons or Figma plugins. So, use those, with a, with the notion that, I have not tested these. So basically, use them at your own risk is what I'm saying. It's what I'm trying to say anyway. So, I would try these out if you're interested. Maybe they work great. Maybe they don't. I don't know. I was reading some of the comments, and it seems like some of them might be a little iffy. But, again, there's lots of freeware ways, lots of freeware icon mapping things online if you need to create your own icon set or whatever. So I would just work closely with my dev team. If I were you, that would be my suggestion to you on that, is work closely with your dev team and see what makes the most sense for those guys. Maybe they can help you do what my team helped me do, which is figure out a way to automate that mapping process so that you don't have to manage that. Because if you get into a huge icon set, it's going to be a nightmare to manage. It'd be someone's full-time job to manage and map, more than 500 of those like my team currently has. So anyway, I hope all that was super helpful to you guys, and I hope you learned something here today, and if not, maybe check out the next one or check out one of the other videos that I've got. Hopefully there'll be something of value to you there, but we'll see you guys on the next one, and I think what I'll try to do is probably on the next one we'll probably start to get into some more advanced versions of one of these other subjects. I think we still need to do a more advanced version of the grid, because this was a nice simple grid, and I think that we could probably take you guys down the path of what it looks like to do a custom flexible grid that would have breakpoints and that kind of thing. I don't know. I'll figure out what we're going to do on the next one, and and get that one made here shortly. So again, thanks for hanging out with me to the end here if you made it this far. And yeah, hopefully you guys find all this useful. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.